She woke up, gasping for air, her heart slamming violently against her chest as she shot upright in a massive, silk-covered bed she had never seen before in her life. The room was cold from the air conditioning, quiet enough for her to hear her own uneven breathing, and the first thing she noticed was that she was barefoot. The second thing she noticed was the door, locked. She stumbled toward it instantly, panic flooding through her veins as she grabbed the handle and twisted it over and over again. Nothing. "Hello?" she screamed, pounding hard against the wood. "Open this damn door." Her voice echoed through the luxurious bedroom, past the expensive paintings, past the floor-to-ceiling windows, past the fresh roses sitting neatly beside a handwritten note on the nightstand. Her shaking fingers reached for the paper. "You have 6 months to fall in love with me. After that, I'll let you go." She read it twice before her stomach dropped completely. Then she heard it. A deep male voice downstairs, calm and controlled. "She's awake." The sound of slow footsteps moving toward the room made her back away from the door immediately. Every instinct inside her screamed danger. The lock clicked. The handle slowly turned. And standing on the other side was the last man she ever expected to see again. The same man who sat in the darkest corner of the club the night before. The same man who never took his eyes off her while she danced. Tall, expensive black suit, cold grey eyes that looked almost emotionless until they landed on her face. Then something inside them changed. "Good morning, Riley," he said softly. She stared at him in horror. "Who are you?" But deep down, she already knew exactly who he was. Everyone in the city knew who he was. Colton Hayes. The man people whispered about in private and feared in public. The man connected to half the clubs, casinos, and luxury buildings downtown. A man so powerful that police officers avoided saying his name too loudly. Riley took another step backward. "You kidnapped me." Colton closed the door behind him, carefully, like he wasn't entering the room of a terrified woman, but his own home after a long day. "I brought you somewhere safe." "Safe?" she snapped. "You locked me in a room." He looked at her calmly, completely unaffected by her fear. "You were never going back to that life." Riley's chest tightened. "You don't even know me." His jaw flexed slightly before he answered. "I know enough. Engage in our comment section and tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Whether you're in Georgia, Moscow, Ohio, California, New York, Mexico City, Tokyo, drop your location below. And if you're new to this channel, hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our new videos." Riley's eyes searched the room desperately for something she could use as a weapon, but Colton noticed immediately. "Relax," he said quietly. "If I wanted to hurt you, I wouldn't have spent all night making sure you were comfortable." That answer only terrified her more because there was no anger in his voice. No shouting, no threats. Just certainty. The kind of certainty that came from a man used to getting exactly what he wanted. "Let me go," she whispered. Colton stared at her for several long seconds before stepping closer. "I can't do that." Riley felt her pulse racing harder. "Why?" His eyes moved over her face slowly, almost like he was memorizing every detail again. "Because the moment I saw you on that stage last night," he said, "I knew you were going to be mine." Riley's stomach turned. She remembered him immediately now. The club had been packed that night, louder than usual, filled with wealthy men throwing money around like it meant nothing. But among all the faces watching her dance, one man never looked distracted. One man never smiled, never drank, never touched the women around him. He just watched her, patiently, intensely, like he already owned her before she even knew his name. At first, she ignored it because men stared at her every night. That was part of the job. But something about him felt different. Most men looked at her with hunger. Colton Hayes looked at her with intention. And somehow that was worse. Riley slowly backed toward the large window behind her. "You're insane." He gave the faintest smile. "Maybe." Then he reached into his pocket and placed her phone gently on the dresser beside her. "Your parents already know you're safe." Her eyes widened instantly. "You talked to my parents. They were worried. You had no right. I have every right to protect what belongs to me." The words hit her like ice water. Riley shook her head quickly. "I'm not yours." Colton stepped closer again until barely a few feet separated them. "You will be." Silence filled the room. Thick, heavy, dangerous. Riley hated herself for noticing how attractive he was standing there. The expensive watch on his wrist, the calm confidence in his posture, the low, controlled voice that never needed to rise to command attention. Everything about him felt dangerous in the worst possible way, yet she couldn't stop looking at him. And that terrified her most of all. Colton finally glanced toward the untouched breakfast sitting near the fireplace. "Eat something." "I'm not hungry." "You will be." "I said I'm not hungry." His expression darkened slightly for the first time. Not anger, disappointment. "Riley," he said carefully, "you can fight me all you want, but you're staying here." She folded her arms tightly. "For 6 months? Maybe less? And if I never fall in love with you," he held her gaze without hesitation, "then I'll let you walk away forever." Riley almost laughed at how ridiculous it sounded. A Mafia boss giving her a deadline to fall in love with him like this was some twisted romance movie. But something about the way he said it made her realize he meant every word. And that was exactly what made the fear settle deeper into her chest. Because men like Colton Hayes didn't make promises they couldn't keep. He turned toward the door before pausing one last time. "Oh," he said quietly, glancing back at her. "You should know something." Riley didn't answer. Colton's eyes locked onto hers again. "I've never wanted anything the way I want you." Then he walked out, locking the door behind him again, leaving Riley standing alone in the middle of the luxurious prison he had prepared for her. And as the sound of his footsteps disappeared downstairs, she finally realized one horrifying truth. This was never a random kidnapping. From the moment Colton Hayes saw her dancing under those club lights, he had already decided exactly how this story would end. Riley stood frozen in the center of the bedroom long after the door shut behind him, her breathing still uneven as his final words repeated inside her head over and over again. "I've never wanted anything the way I want you." Every part of her wanted to believe this was temporary, some twisted obsession that would disappear after a few days. But deep down, she already understood the truth. Men like Colton Hayes did not lose interest easily. Men like him took what they wanted and built entire worlds around it. She forced herself to move, pacing the room while trying to think clearly. The bedroom itself looked bigger than her entire apartment back home. There were cream-colored walls, expensive artwork, velvet curtains pulled halfway open to reveal a breathtaking ocean view and a fireplace quietly crackling near the sitting area. It almost looked romantic if she ignored the fact that she was trapped inside it. Riley grabbed the nearest decorative object she could find and rushed toward the window, slamming it hard against the glass. Nothing. The windows were reinforced. Of course they were. Her frustration exploded instantly. "Damn it!" she screamed, throwing the object across the room where it shattered loudly against the wall. She pressed both hands against her face, trying not to panic completely. Then she noticed something strange. Beside the roses on the nightstand sat a small silver box. Slowly, cautiously, she walked over and opened it. Inside was a diamond bracelet so expensive it almost blinded her under the morning sunlight. Riley stared at it in disbelief before anger flooded her chest all over again. "You think gifts are going to fix this?" she muttered to herself. At that exact moment, the bedroom door unlocked again. Riley spun around instantly. Colton walked back inside, carrying a coffee cup in one hand. His grey eyes immediately moved toward the broken object on the floor, but instead of getting angry, he simply looked back at her calmly. "You're going to hurt yourself breaking things?" Riley pointed toward the door furiously. "You think jewelry and roses are supposed to make me forget you kidnapped me?" Colton stepped farther into the room. "No." "Then what is all this?" "Comfort." Riley laughed bitterly. "This isn't comfort. This is a cage." His expression remained unreadable. "A cage would have chains." "Oh, so I should thank you?" "You'll understand eventually." That answer only made her angrier. Riley stormed toward him, stopping just inches away. "Listen carefully, because I'm only saying this once. I don't care how rich you are or how powerful people think you are. I am never falling in love with you." For the first time since she met him, something dangerous flickered behind his eyes. Not rage, something quieter, more possessive. Colton slowly held out the coffee toward her. "Drink this before it gets cold." Riley slapped the cup from his hand instantly. It crashed against the floor, coffee splashing across the expensive marble. The silence afterward felt sharp enough to cut through skin. Riley immediately realized what she had done. Any other dangerous man would have exploded. But Colton simply stared at the shattered cup for a few seconds before looking back at her again. "Feel better now?" Riley frowned, confused by his calmness. "Why aren't you angry?" He took one slow step closer. "Because you're scared." His voice softened slightly. "And because I know you'll stop fighting me eventually." Riley swallowed hard as he moved close enough for her to smell his cologne again. Dark and expensive and impossible to ignore. He reached toward her suddenly, making her flinch. But instead of grabbing her, he gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The softness of the gesture caught her completely off guard. "Don't touch me," she whispered. Colton studied her face carefully before lowering his hand. "You looked beautiful on that stage last night," he said quietly. "But you look even more beautiful angry." Riley hated the way her stomach tightened, hearing those words. She immediately stepped away from him. "Stop talking to me like we're together." "We will be." "No, we won't." "You keep saying that." He glanced toward the untouched breakfast again before walking toward the door. "Eat something, Riley." She crossed her arms stubbornly. "I'd rather starve." Colton paused near the doorway without turning around. "No, you wouldn't." Then he left again. This time he didn't lock the door. Riley noticed immediately. Her heart jumped. Was this some kind of test? She rushed toward the hallway, cautiously, and looked around. Massive mansion corridors stretched endlessly in both directions. Everything looked quiet. No guards in sight. No cameras she could immediately notice. This was her chance. Riley hurried barefoot down the hallway as fast as possible, her pulse racing harder with every second. She passed enormous paintings, crystal chandeliers, marble staircases, and giant windows overlooking the ocean. The mansion looked less like a house and more like a private resort hidden away from the rest of the world. But she didn't care about any of it. She just needed to escape. Reaching the bottom floor, she spotted large front doors ahead and sprinted toward them instantly. Freedom. She could almost feel it. But just as she reached for the handle, a calm voice behind her stopped her cold. You should at least put shoes on before running away. Riley turned sharply. Colton sat casually in a chair near the fireplace, holding another cup of coffee, like he had been waiting for this exact moment the entire time. He looked devastatingly handsome in a black dress shirt, with the sleeves rolled slightly upward, exposing tattoos along his forearm. Riley hated herself for noticing. Move, she snapped. Colton leaned back slowly. You can leave right now if you want. Riley blinked in confusion. What? Open the door. Suspicion flooded her instantly. Slowly, she turned the handle. The door opened. But the second she looked outside, her stomach dropped. Massive iron gates surrounded the property completely. Security guards stood near every exit. Beyond the gates was nothing except cliffs and miles of empty, private land. Riley turned back toward him in disbelief. You planned this. Of course I did. You're insane. Colton stood from the chair and walked toward her slowly. No, he said softly. I'm patient. Riley stepped backward as he approached, but somehow his calmness felt more dangerous than shouting ever could. You can keep trying to run, he continued, but eventually you'll realize something. What? He stopped directly in front of her. Nobody will ever love you the way I do. Riley opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Because part of her feared he might actually believe that. And the most terrifying part was how convincing he sounded when he said it. Riley could not stop thinking about his words for the rest of the day. Nobody will ever love you the way I do. The sentence followed her through every corner of the mansion, like a voice trapped inside her head. She hated how confident he sounded when he said it, hated the calm certainty in his eyes, hated the fact that part of her kept replaying the moment over and over again instead of forgetting it. She spent hours walking through the massive estate alone, trying to understand what kind of man Colton Hayes really was. The mansion was enormous, far bigger than anything she had ever imagined someone could actually live in. There was an indoor pool surrounded by white marble columns, a private movie theater, a glass wine room larger than her old apartment, and balconies overlooking the ocean from almost every side of the house. Yet, despite all the luxury surrounding her, the mansion felt strangely empty, quiet, cold, like no real life existed inside it before she arrived. Every employee she passed treated her differently too. Nobody looked at her with pity. Nobody looked surprised to see her there. If anything, they treated her carefully, almost respectfully, like Colton had already made it clear she mattered to him more than anything else inside that house. One older woman in the kitchen even smiled softly at her and said, "Mr. Hayes hasn't eaten breakfast at home in years." Riley frowned immediately. "What does that have to do with me?" The woman hesitated before answering carefully. "Since you arrived, he hasn't left the house once." Riley didn't know why that unsettled her so much, but it did, because it confirmed something she already suspected. This was not some temporary obsession for him. Colton had rearranged his entire world around her in less than 24 hours. That realization stayed with her all afternoon, until evening finally arrived. She was standing near one of the giant windows upstairs when she noticed headlights approaching outside. Seconds later, the front doors opened downstairs, and Colton walked inside, surrounded by two men in suits. His presence immediately changed the atmosphere of the entire mansion. Everyone straightened. Conversation stopped. Even from upstairs, Riley could feel the power he carried without saying a single word. Colton handed his watch to one of the men while loosening his tie slightly, and for a brief moment his eyes lifted toward the staircase, toward her. The second he saw her standing there, his entire expression softened. It happened so quickly, Riley almost thought she imagined it. He dismissed the men around him immediately, before walking upstairs alone. Riley turned away from the railing fast, pretending she had not been watching him. Her pulse quickened, hearing his footsteps approaching down the hallway. "You didn't try escaping again today," he said from behind her. Riley crossed her arms. "Don't sound disappointed." Colton walked into the room slowly. Tonight he looked more tired than before. The sharpness in his face softened slightly by exhaustion. Yet somehow that only made him more attractive. "I'm relieved," he corrected quietly. Riley forced herself not to react. "You act like this is normal." "What part?" "Kidnapping a woman and locking her inside your house." Colton loosened the top buttons of his shirt calmly. "You're free to walk around the estate whenever you want." "That's not freedom?" He looked at her carefully for a moment before asking, "Did anyone disrespect you today?" Riley blinked. "What? Any staff? Security? Anyone?" "No." "Good." There was something strangely genuine about the concern in his voice that threw her off balance again. Before she could respond, one of the house employees knocked gently before entering with dinner trays. Riley immediately noticed there was only one table, prepared despite the massive dining room downstairs. "You're eating with me?" she asked cautiously after the employee left. Colton pulled out a chair for her. "I plan on eating every meal with you." Riley hesitated before finally sitting down, mostly because she realized she actually was hungry now. The smell alone made her stomach tighten painfully. Steak, fresh pasta, garlic bread, expensive wine sitting untouched near the candles already lit across the table. It looked less like dinner, and more like a date neither of them had agreed to openly. Riley picked up her fork carefully. "So, what happens if I refuse to play along with whatever fantasy this is?" Colton cut into his food without looking away from her. "You already are playing along." "No, I'm surviving." Same difference. Riley rolled her eyes, but secretly hated how smoothly he answered everything. There was a never hesitation in him, never uncertainty, just complete control. For several minutes they ate in silence before Colton finally spoke again. "You danced differently than the other women at that club." Riley looked up immediately. "What's that supposed to mean?" "They performed for attention." His eyes stayed locked onto hers. You performed like you were trying to escape something. The fork in Riley's hand paused mid-air. She did not answer right away, because the truth was he was right. Dancing had always been the only time she felt fully disconnected from reality, from debt, from stress, from the life she never wanted, but somehow ended up living anyway. Colton noticed her silence instantly. I watched you for weeks before I approached you. Riley's stomach tightened. Weeks? He nodded once. Every Friday night. That's creepy. Maybe. He took a sip of wine, calmly. But you still noticed me. Riley hated that he was right again. She remembered exactly when she first noticed him. A man like Colton Hayes was impossible not to notice. While every other wealthy man at the club acted loud and desperate, he stayed calm in the corner, watching her like he already understood something nobody else did. You barely looked at the other dancers, she admitted quietly before she could stop herself. A faint smile appeared on his face. Because I wasn't interested in them. Riley looked down at her plate quickly, suddenly aware of how intimate the conversation had become. She needed distance again. You don't even know me. I know your favorite color is blue, even though you pretend it's black because you think black makes you look tougher. Her eyes widened slightly. I know you send money to your parents every month without telling them you skip meals sometimes to do it. Riley slowly lowered her fork completely now. How do you know that? I know your dream was to open a dance studio before your ex stole most of your savings. The room suddenly felt colder. Riley stared at him in shock. You investigated me. I protected my investment. Investment? She repeated angrily. Colton leaned back in his chair slowly. You can hate how I found you, Riley. His voice lowered slightly. But don't pretend nobody has ever cared enough to learn every part of you before. Riley's chest tightened unexpectedly, because deep down she knew he was right. Most people in her life only cared about what she could give them. Money, attention, entertainment. But Colton noticed things about her nobody else ever bothered to see. And somehow that scared her more than the kidnapping itself. Because she was beginning to realize the real danger was not being trapped inside his mansion. The real danger was the growing part of her that no longer wanted to leave. The thought stayed with Riley long after dinner ended. The real danger was no longer the locked gates or the guards surrounding the estate. It was the way Colton looked at her, like she mattered more than everything else in his world combined. No man had ever watched her that way before. Most men looked at her with temporary desire, with hunger that disappeared the second they got what they wanted. But Colton looked at her like a man protecting something precious. And no matter how hard she tried to deny it, part of her was beginning to crave that feeling. That realization frustrated her enough to avoid him the next morning completely. She stayed inside the upstairs library for hours pretending to read, while secretly trying to clear her thoughts. The mansion was unusually quiet again, sunlight pouring through the giant windows, while soft music played somewhere downstairs. Riley tried focusing on the book in front of her, but every few minutes she found herself replaying their conversation from the night before. The way he remembered details about her life, the way his expression softened whenever she spoke, the calm confidence in his voice every time he talked about their future, like it was already written. She hated how deeply it affected her. Around noon, she finally gave up pretending to read and walked downstairs barefoot, wearing one of the silk dresses someone had left in her closet earlier that morning. She had not planned on wearing any of the clothes Colton bought for her, but after realizing every single outfit somehow fit her perfectly, her resistance slowly started weakening. She reached the kitchen, expecting it to be empty, only to stop immediately when she saw him standing there. Colton was leaning against the counter with his sleeves rolled up, pouring coffee while reading something on his phone. He looked up the second she entered the room, and for a brief moment, he simply stared at her silently. Riley instantly became aware of the dress hugging her body. "What?" she asked defensively. Colton slipped his phone into his pocket slowly. "Nothing." His eyes moved over her again. "You look beautiful." Riley rolled her eyes quickly, even though heat rushed into her cheeks. "You say that every 5 minutes. Because it keeps being true." She walked past him toward the refrigerator, trying to ignore how his presence alone made the room feel smaller somehow. "Do you ever stop flirting? Do you ever stop pretending you don't like it?" Riley froze for half a second before grabbing a bottle of water. "You're very full of yourself." Colton moved closer until he stood beside her at the counter. "No," he said quietly. "I'm just paying attention." Riley turned toward him too quickly and nearly collided with his chest. The closeness caught her off guard immediately. Even standing still, he carried a kind of dangerous calmness that made it impossible not to feel him near her. His grey eyes lowered briefly toward her lips before lifting again. "You're nervous around me today," he said softly. "I'm nervous around kidnappers in general." One corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Fair enough. Riley hated how attractive his smile was because it happened so rarely. Most of the time, Colton looked cold and unreadable around everyone else. But with her, those walls kept slipping little by little. Before she could step away, one of the staff members entered the kitchen nervously. "Sir," the man said carefully, "the investors are waiting in your office." Colton never looked away from Riley. "Reschedule." The employee blinked in surprise. "All of them?" "Yes. But they flew in from Chicago this morning. Then they can fly back disappointed." Riley stared at him after the employee left. "You just cancelled an important meeting." "Yes." "Because I walked into the kitchen?" "Because I'd rather be here." Her heart betrayed her again, with one hard beat against her chest. Riley quickly unscrewed her water bottle, just to avoid looking at him directly. "You can't ignore your entire life because of me." Colton leaned one hand against the counter beside her. "Watch me." The intensity in his voice made her glance up again immediately. Big mistake. He was already watching her, with that same focused expression that always made her feel like the only woman in the world. Riley cleared her throat softly. "Why are you like this?" Colton's eyes narrowed slightly. "Like what?" "Obsessed." The word hung heavily between them. Surprisingly, he did not deny it. "Because I spent years surrounded by fake people," he answered quietly. "Then one night I walked into that club and saw someone real." Riley looked away first this time. His honesty kept catching her off guard, because she expected manipulation from a man like him, expected lies and games and control. But Colton rarely hid what he felt. When he wanted her, he said it. When he watched her, he admitted it. When he looked at her like she already belonged beside him, he did not apologize for it. That certainty was dangerously addictive. "You barely even know me," she whispered again, though her voice sounded weaker now. Colton stepped even closer. "Then tell me something real." Riley's fingers tightened around the water bottle. "What?" "Something nobody else knows." She hesitated. "Why?" "Because I want every part of you." The words should have frightened her more than they did. Instead, they sent warmth rushing slowly through her stomach. Riley looked down at the marble floor for a long moment before finally speaking quietly. "When I was little," she admitted softly, "I used to practice wedding dances alone in my room." Colton stayed silent, listening carefully. "I'd put on music and pretend somebody actually loved me enough to stay." The confession embarrassed her immediately. "Forget I said that." But Colton gently touched her chin before she could look away completely. "Nobody's ever staying longer than me," he said quietly. The sincerity in his voice hit her harder than she expected. For a second, the entire kitchen felt too quiet, too intimate, too dangerous. Riley's breathing slowed as his thumb brushed lightly against her skin. His eyes lowered toward her lips again. And this time, neither of them moved away. The tension between them tightened slowly, painfully, until Riley could actually feel herself leaning closer without meaning to. Colton noticed instantly. His voice dropped lower. "Tell me to stop." Riley opened her mouth, but nothing came out, because the terrifying truth was she no longer wanted him to stop. Riley's heart pounded so hard, she was certain he could hear it. The air between them felt impossibly heavy, as Colton's hand remained gently against her chin, his thumb brushing softly along her skin, while neither of them moved. She had spent days convincing herself that her growing attraction toward him was only confusion, only fear mixed with isolation and luxury, and the intensity of being trapped inside his world. But standing there in his kitchen, with his eyes locked onto hers, she could no longer lie to herself. The tension between them was real, dangerous, addictive. Colton studied her face carefully, almost patiently, like he was giving her every chance to pull away before crossing a line neither of them could uncross. "Tell me to stop," he repeated quietly. Riley swallowed hard. Every logical thought inside her screamed that she should step back immediately. This man kidnapped her, controlled every part of her environment, watched her long before she even knew his name. But none of those thoughts stopped the way her body reacted whenever he came near her. And somehow that terrified her more than the locked gates outside. She finally forced herself to step backward. The moment the distance returned between them, Colton slowly lowered his hand without complaint. No anger, no frustration, just calm restraint. Riley immediately grabbed onto that distance, like it was the only thing keeping her thoughts together. "You can't look at me like that," she whispered. Colton's expression barely changed. "Why?" "Because you know exactly what you're doing." One side of his mouth lifted slightly. "And what's that?" Riley looked away quickly. "Making it hard to hate you." Silence filled the kitchen again. Not awkward silence, dangerous silence. The kind that pulled people closer instead of pushing them apart. Colton walked toward the coffee machine calmly while Riley tried slowing her breathing again. "You still should," he said after a moment. "Hate me." Riley frowned slightly. "What?" He poured himself another cup without looking at her. "For taking you away from your life." Riley stared at him carefully now, because for the first time since meeting him, she heard something unfamiliar beneath his calm voice. guilt. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. Colton finally looked back at her. "No." The honesty in his answer sent another confusing wave through her chest. He did not pretend to be innocent, did not make excuses. Colton knew exactly what he had done, and still looked at her like he would do it all over again, without hesitation. "Then why say I should hate you?" Riley asked. He took a slow sip of coffee before answering. "Because eventually you'll realize how dangerous loving me really is." Before Riley could respond, his phone suddenly rang across the counter. Colton glanced at the screen, and his expression hardened instantly. The warmth in his eyes disappeared so fast it almost startled her. He answered the call without taking his eyes off her. "What?" His voice changed completely now, colder, sharper. Riley watched carefully as the muscles in his jaw tightened. "Who authorized that?" Silence. Then Colton's eyes darkened dangerously. "Fix it before I do." He hung up abruptly. Riley folded her arms slowly. "Business problems?" Colton slipped the phone back into his pocket. "Nothing for you to worry about." "You know," she said carefully, "most people would probably be terrified of you right now." "Are you?" Riley expected herself to say yes immediately. Instead, she hesitated too long. Colton noticed. Of course he noticed. He stepped closer again, but this time slower, more careful with her. "You're trying very hard not to like me," he said quietly. Riley laughed nervously. "You kidnapped me. I feel like that's a pretty reasonable reaction." "And yet you still stayed in the kitchen." Her stomach tightened instantly, because once again, he was right. She could have left minutes ago. Instead, she kept standing there, talking to him, like this strange tension between them was becoming impossible to resist. Colton reached past her suddenly to grab something from the counter, his chest brushing lightly against her shoulder in the process. The small accidental contact sent heat rushing through her entire body so fast it embarrassed her. He noticed her reaction immediately. "Riley." His voice lowered slightly. She looked up before she could stop herself. "Mistake." He was too close again. "What?" she whispered. His eyes stayed fixed on hers for several long seconds before he finally spoke. "You're shaking." Riley looked down quickly and realized her fingers actually were trembling slightly around the water bottle. She hated how aware he was of every tiny reaction she had around him. "I'm cold," she lied softly. Colton removed his black suit jacket immediately and draped it gently over her shoulders before she could protest. The warmth of it surrounded her instantly. Expensive cologne. His scent. His heat lingering in the fabric. Riley's chest tightened unexpectedly. "You really think being nice is going to make me fall for you?" she asked quietly. Colton leaned against the counter beside her. "No." "Then why do all this?" His gaze softened again. "Because taking care of you feels natural to me." The words hit harder than she expected. Nobody had ever said something like that to her before, so simply, so honestly, without expecting something in return. Riley looked down at the jacket around her shoulders and suddenly remembered all the nights she came home, exhausted after dancing at the club, with nobody waiting for her, nobody asking if she had eaten, nobody caring whether she made it home safely or not. Then, suddenly, this dangerous man entered her life and started treating her like the center of his entire universe. It made no sense. None of it should have affected her this deeply, yet it did. Colton studied her quietly before speaking again. "Come with me tonight." Riley looked up cautiously. Where? Dinner? Inside the mansion? No. Her eyes narrowed immediately. You're taking me outside? Yes. Riley stared at him in disbelief. Why would you trust me outside this place? Colton's gaze never wavered. Because you'll come back. The confidence in his answer irritated her instantly. You sound very sure of yourself. I am? And if I run? Colton stepped closer one last time until his voice became almost intimate. Then I'll spend the rest of my life finding you again. Riley's breath caught softly in her throat, because somehow he made the threat sound romantic instead of frightening. And the worst part was the dangerous flutter building slowly inside her chest at the thought of him chasing her forever if she disappeared. She should have been planning another escape. Instead, she found herself wondering what kind of restaurant a man like Colton Hayes would take her to. And that terrified her more than anything else so far. Riley spent nearly an hour staring at herself in the mirror that evening, trying to understand when everything started changing. At some point, the fear she felt around Colton stopped feeling simple. It mixed with curiosity now, attraction, anticipation. She hated admitting it even to herself, but part of her had looked forward to dinner with him the second he mentioned it. That realization alone made her feel dangerously vulnerable. The closet inside her room had been completely transformed since she arrived at the mansion. Designer dresses lined the walls, expensive heels sat arranged perfectly beneath soft lighting, and jewelry sparkled inside glass cases like something out of a luxury boutique. Riley had never owned anything remotely close to this kind of lifestyle before. Yet somehow Colton seemed to know her taste perfectly. Every dress matched her style. Every detail felt carefully chosen for her specifically. That level of attention should have frightened her more than it did. Instead, it made her feel seen in a way she had never experienced before. After changing outfits 3 times, she finally settled on a dark navy silk dress that hugged her figure elegantly without trying too hard. The second she walked downstairs and saw Colton waiting near the front entrance, she immediately understood she had made a mistake looking at him directly. He wore a fitted black suit with no tie tonight, the top buttons of his shirt slightly open, exposing part of the tattoos along his chest and neck. But it was the way he looked at her that made her pulse stumble instantly. He went completely still for several seconds. His eyes moved slowly over her body before returning to her face again. "You're staring," Riley said softly, trying to sound unaffected. Colton stepped closer without breaking eye contact. "I know." Riley forced herself not to react, though the intensity in his voice sent heat rushing into her chest again. "You clean up well for a criminal." One corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "And you look dangerous in that dress." Before she could answer, he held out his hand toward her calmly. Riley hesitated for half a second before placing her hand in his. The second, his fingers closed gently around hers. Something shifted inside her again. His touch always felt strangely protective instead of forceful, even though she knew how powerful he truly was. As they walked outside together, Riley realized this was the first time she had left the mansion since waking up there. The night air felt cool against her skin, carrying the scent of the ocean nearby. A sleek black car waited near the entrance, but this time there were no guards surrounding it, no men following closely behind. Just Colton opening the passenger door for her himself. Riley looked at him suspiciously before getting inside. "You really trust me this much?" Colton closed the door gently before walking around to the driver's side. "I trust what's happening between us." Riley immediately looked out the window after that, pretending those words did not affect her. But they did. The drive through the city felt strangely normal despite everything. Colton drove with one hand resting casually against the steering wheel, while soft music played quietly through the speakers. Riley caught herself stealing glances at him several times. Away from the mansion, he looked even more intimidating somehow. People on the streets recognized him instantly. She noticed the way valet attendants straightened nervously when his car pulled up outside an elegant rooftop restaurant downtown. Employees rushed to greet him the second they entered. Yet, despite all the attention surrounding him, Colton never took his eyes off Riley for long. The entire rooftop had been reserved privately. Candles flickered along the tables, while city lights stretched endlessly around them. Riley stopped walking for a second, stunned by the view alone. "You rented out the entire restaurant." Colton pulled out her chair for her calmly. "I wanted privacy. Or control." He looked at her carefully before sitting across from her. "Both." Riley shook her head softly, though part of her secretly loved the effort he put into every detail involving her. A waiter approached immediately with wine menus, but Colton waved them away. "Bring her the strawberry lemonade she likes." Riley blinked in surprise. "How do you know I like that?" "You ordered it every Friday night after your shifts." Her stomach tightened again. "You really watched me that closely?" "Every week." The honesty in his voice made it impossible to tell whether she should feel flattered or terrified. Dinner arrived slowly, while the conversation between them became easier than either expected. For the first time since meeting him, Riley found herself laughing quietly at one of his dry comments. The moment the sound left her mouth, Colton's expression changed instantly. Softer, almost fascinated. "What?" she asked cautiously. He leaned back slightly, watching her carefully. "That's the first real laugh I've heard from you." Riley looked down at her drink quickly. "Don't make it weird." Too late. His voice lowered slightly. "I think I'd burn down this entire city just to hear it again." Riley stared at him in disbelief before shaking her head. "You say insane things so casually." That one wasn't casual. The seriousness in his tone sent another wave of heat through her chest. Riley quickly took another sip of her drink to avoid responding. Somewhere during dinner, she realized something even more dangerous than her attraction toward him. She genuinely enjoyed being around him. Colton listened when she spoke, remembered tiny details about her stories, asked questions nobody else ever cared enough to ask. She found herself telling him about her childhood dance recitals, about sneaking into empty studios late at night just to practice alone, about how she once believed her life would become something beautiful before everything got complicated. Colton listened to every word like none of it bored him for even a second. "You still want the dance studio," he said quietly after she finished speaking. Riley shrugged softly. "That dream feels pretty far away now." "No." His eyes stayed locked onto hers. "It doesn't." Riley looked at him carefully. "You really think you can give me everything I want?" Colton answered without hesitation. "Yes." The confidence in his voice should have annoyed her by now. Instead, it made her chest ache strangely, because for the first time in years, somebody sounded absolutely certain she deserved more than survival. Halfway through dinner, Riley excused herself briefly and walked toward the restroom hallway just to clear her thoughts. Her reflection in the mirror startled her slightly when she entered. She looked happier, softer, more alive than she had in months, maybe even years. That realization scared her enough that she stayed there longer than necessary, trying to regain control over herself. But when she finally walked back toward the rooftop, she slowed near the hallway entrance after hearing voices nearby. Male voices. Serious. "She's changing you," one man muttered quietly. Riley immediately recognized the voice as one of Colton's associates from the mansion. Another voice answered carefully. He cancelled 2 meetings this week because of her. Then silence before the first man spoke again. "I've never seen him like this over anyone." Riley's heartbeat quickened slightly. She stepped closer, without meaning to. "You think it's temporary?" the second voice asked. The first man laughed softly under his breath. "No, that's the problem." Riley froze completely after hearing that, because deep down she already knew exactly what they meant. Whatever was happening between her and Colton Hayes had stopped being temporary a long time ago. Riley stayed hidden near the hallway entrance for several seconds after the voices disappeared, her chest tightening slowly as the conversation repeated in her mind. That's the problem. She should have felt relieved hearing that Colton's obsession with her was real. Instead, the words unsettled her deeply, because they confirmed what she already feared. This was no longer a game for him. No temporary fixation. No impulsive attraction. Colton Hayes was genuinely falling in love with her, and somehow she was beginning to fall with him. Riley closed her eyes briefly before forcing herself to walk back toward the rooftop like she had not overheard anything. But the second Colton looked up and saw her approaching. He noticed the shift in her expression immediately. He always noticed. His grey eyes followed her carefully as she sat back down across from him. "What happened?" he asked quietly. Riley picked up her glass to avoid looking at him directly. "Nothing." Colton leaned back slightly, studying her face. "You disappear for 5 minutes and come back looking like you're carrying secrets." Riley forced a small shrug. "Maybe I am." His gaze sharpened slightly at that answer. "Tell me." The simple demand sent a strange heat through her chest again. Riley hated how naturally he slipped into control, hated how part of her responded to it instantly. "I heard your men talking," she admitted softly. Colton's expression darkened immediately. "What did they say?" Riley watched him carefully now. "That I'm changing you." Silence. Colton did not deny it. He simply looked down at the table for a moment before meeting her eyes again. "You are." Riley's pulse quickened. "Does that bother you?" His answer came immediately. "No." Something about the certainty in his voice made her breathing unsteady again. Colton reached for his wine slowly, without breaking eye contact. "Before you," he said quietly. "I barely came home." Riley stayed silent, listening. "I worked constantly. Slept maybe 3 hours a night. Most days I forgot to eat." His voice remained calm, but there was something vulnerable beneath it now. "Then suddenly you walked into my life, and somehow everything else stopped mattering as much." Riley looked down at the candlelight flickering between them, because hearing those words affected her more than she wanted him to know. No man had ever spoken about her like she was life-changing before. Desired, yes. Wanted temporarily, yes. But never needed. Colton noticed her silence immediately. That scares you. Riley laughed softly under her breath. Shouldn't it? Probably. He leaned slightly forward. But I'm not apologizing for it. The honesty in him kept pulling her closer, no matter how hard she tried resisting. Most powerful men hid their emotions behind arrogance or manipulation. Colton hid nothing when it came to her. His obsession sat openly between them every second they were together, impossible to ignore. Riley slowly set her drink down. You know what confuses me? What? You could have any woman you want. Colton's eyes narrowed slightly. I don't want any woman. Riley's stomach tightened instantly at the way he said it. But why me? She whispered. For the first time that night, Colton looked away briefly, almost like he was choosing his next words carefully. Do you remember the first night I saw you? Riley nodded slowly. You wore silver heels. Her eyes widened slightly. You remember my shoes? I remember everything. His voice lowered. You walked onto that stage looking confident, but your eyes looked tired. Riley felt something twist painfully inside her chest, because nobody had ever noticed that before. The entire club watched you like you were entertainment, Colton continued quietly. But I kept thinking how badly I wanted to take you out of that place. Riley swallowed hard. You didn't even know me. I knew enough. He leaned closer now, his gaze locked onto hers completely. I knew I never wanted another man looking at you the way they were. The possessiveness in his voice should have alarmed her. Instead, warmth spread slowly through her stomach again. Riley hated how much she liked hearing him say things like that. Colton noticed the reaction she tried hiding immediately. His eyes softened slightly. There it is again. Riley frowned softly. What? That look you get when you stop fighting me for a second. The words embarrassed her enough to make her glance away quickly. Colton reached across the table then, his fingers brushing gently against hers. The small touch sent another rush of heat through her body instantly. Riley. His voice dropped lower. She looked back up slowly. Big mistake. He was watching her like she was already his. You don't have to be afraid of wanting me too. The sentence hit her harder than she expected, because deep down, he was right. The attraction between them had already crossed into something much deeper than curiosity. Riley thought about him constantly now. Wondered what mood he was in before seeing him each morning. Noticed every detail about the way he looked at her, spoke to her, protected her. Somewhere along the way, the man who kidnapped her had become the person she felt safest around. That realization terrified her enough that she pulled her hand away suddenly and stood from the table. I need air. Colton immediately rose with her. Riley, please. He stopped moving after hearing the quiet panic in her voice. Riley turned away quickly and walked toward the edge of the rooftop overlooking the city lights below. Her chest felt tight, emotions twisting together so intensely she could barely sort through them anymore. She heard Colton approach behind her several seconds later, slower this time. Careful. Look at me, he said softly. Riley shook her head immediately. I can't. Why? Her voice cracked slightly when she answered. Because I'm starting to forget I'm supposed to hate you. Silence followed her confession. Heavy, dangerous. Then suddenly she felt his jacket settle gently around her shoulders, against the cool night air. Colton stepped beside her quietly, close enough for his arm to brush against hers. "Riley," he said softly after a long pause, "do you know what the worst part of all this is for me?" She looked at him carefully now. His expression had softened completely again, vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "What?" Colton's eyes held hers for several seconds before he answered quietly. "I think if I met you under normal circumstances," his jaw tightened slightly, "you still would have ruined me." Riley's breath caught softly in her throat. And before she could stop herself, before logic or fear could interrupt the moment again, she turned toward him fully and kissed him first. The second Riley kissed him, the entire world around them seemed to disappear. The city lights below, the soft music playing behind them, the distant sounds of the restaurant. All of it faded beneath the shock of what she had just done. For one brief moment, Colton did not move at all, almost like even he had not expected her to finally cross that line herself. Then his hand slid slowly against her waist, pulling her closer, with a control so gentle it somehow felt even more dangerous. The kiss deepened carefully, intensely, like he was holding back far more than he was allowing himself to show. Riley felt heat rush through her entire body instantly. She should have stopped. She should have stepped away and remembered every reason this man was wrong for her. Instead, she kissed him harder. Colton made a low sound under his breath before his other hand moved to the side of her neck, his thumb brushing softly along her skin, while he kissed her like he had imagined this moment for weeks, maybe months. Riley lost track of time completely until she finally pulled back first, breathing unevenly. The moment their eyes met again, she saw it immediately. Colton looked completely ruined. His calm control had cracks in it now. Desire, relief, possession. Riley's heart pounded harder, realizing she had done that to him. Colton rested his forehead lightly against hers for several seconds before speaking quietly. "You have no idea what you just did to me." Riley tried to steady her breathing. "That makes two of us." One corner of his mouth lifted slightly, but the intensity in his eyes never faded. If anything, it deepened. His fingers tightened subtly against her waist, like he was resisting the urge to pull her even closer. "Say something," Riley whispered nervously. Colton stared at her for another long moment before answering in the lowest voice she had ever heard from him. "If I kiss you again right now," he said carefully, "I'm not stopping." Heat rushed straight into Riley's chest. The honesty in his voice made her pulse stumble again because she believed him completely. Every instinct inside her told her that once Colton Hayes truly lost control around her, there would be no going back from it. She looked away first, trying to gather herself again, but Colton gently tilted her face back toward him. "Don't hide from me now." Riley swallowed hard. "I just kissed the man who kidnapped me." "And?" She stared at him in disbelief. "And you're acting like that's normal." "No," he answered softly. "I'm acting like you wanted to." The frustrating part was that he was right again. Riley hated how easily he read her, how quickly he noticed every emotion she tried hiding. She pulled away slightly, needing distance before her thoughts completely disappeared around him. "This changes nothing?" she whispered. Colton's expression barely shifted. "Liar." Riley opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. Because deep down, She already knew something had changed. The tension between them was no longer unspoken. The line had already been crossed. Colton slowly brushed his thumb against her lower lip. His gaze fixed there for half a second before returning to her eyes again. "I've imagined kissing you since the first night I saw you." Riley's stomach tightened instantly. "That's not helping." "Good." She laughed softly despite herself, shaking her head while trying to regain control over her thoughts. "You're impossible." Colton looked almost amused now. "And yet you kissed me anyway." Before Riley could answer, his phone buzzed sharply in his pocket again. The shift in him happened instantly. The softness disappeared from his expression as he answered the call. "What?" His voice turned cold immediately. Riley stepped back quietly, watching him carefully while he listened. "No," Colton said sharply into the phone. "Handle it yourselves." Silence. Then his jaw tightened dangerously. "I said no." He ended the call abruptly before slipping the phone away again. Riley folded her arms slowly. "You really do ignore your entire empire for me now." Colton looked at her calmly. "I warned them." "About what?" His eyes stayed locked onto hers. "That you come first." The words hit her harder than they should have. Riley turned away quickly toward the city again, pretending the cool night air was the reason her breathing felt uneven. Nobody had ever chosen her first before. Not consistently. Not completely. Yet Colton did it so naturally, like it was the easiest decision in the world. She heard him move behind her again before his voice softened slightly. "Come home with me." Riley blinked slowly before turning back toward him. "Home?" Colton stepped closer carefully. "The mansion." His gaze held hers intensely. "I want you there." Riley stared at him for several long seconds because she realized something terrifying in that moment. The mansion no longer felt entirely like a prison in her mind either. Somewhere during the past few days, it had slowly started feeling safer than anywhere else she could imagine. And that was because of him. Colton reached for her hand again, giving her enough space to pull away if she wanted. Riley looked down at his hand briefly before placing hers in it willingly this time. The smallest shift in his expression revealed how much that affected him. As they walked back through the restaurant together, Riley noticed the way people looked at them. Not at her alone, at them, like she already belonged beside him. Surprisingly, she did not hate it as much as she should have. The drive back to the mansion felt quieter now, but not uncomfortable. Colton kept one hand resting against the steering wheel, while the other remained loosely around hers the entire time. Riley caught herself staring at their hands together more than once during the drive. It felt strangely intimate, dangerous, real. When they finally arrived back at the mansion, Colton walked her upstairs himself without saying much. But the tension between them had changed completely now. Every glance lasted longer. Every accidental touch felt heavier. Riley stopped outside her bedroom door first, suddenly aware of how fast her heart was beating again. Colton stood directly in front of her, close enough for her to feel his warmth. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Then his hand slowly lifted to brush lightly against her cheek again. "You should sleep," he said quietly, though his voice sounded strained now. Riley looked up at him carefully. "You don't sound like you want me to." A dark look crossed his face instantly. "Riley." Her pulse jumped, hearing the warning in his tone. But instead of stepping away, she moved slightly closer to him. The change in his breathing was immediate. "What happens now?" she whispered softly. Colton stared at her like he was fighting himself. "Now?" His hand tightened gently against her waist again. "Now I try very hard not to scare you." Riley's breath caught softly, because for the first time since meeting him, she realized something important. Colton was not struggling to control her. He was struggling to control himself around her. And somehow, that made him even more dangerous than before. Riley barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt Colton's hand against her waist again, heard the roughness in his voice outside her bedroom door, saw the way his control nearly slipped whenever she moved closer to him. She lay awake, tangled in expensive silk sheets, while her thoughts replayed every second of the evening over and over again. The kiss, the tension afterward, the terrifying realization that she no longer wanted distance from him the way she once did. At some point during the night, she finally admitted something to herself that she had been avoiding for days. She wanted him. Not just physically, though that alone had become impossible to ignore. She wanted his attention, his possessiveness, the way he watched her like she mattered more than anything else in his world. And once that truth settled into her chest, sleep became completely impossible. By morning, Riley gave up trying altogether. She slipped out of bed early, wrapped herself in one of the oversized shirts she found folded near the bathroom, and quietly walked downstairs barefoot, while the mansion remained mostly silent. The shirt smelled exactly like him. That realization alone made heat rush through her chest again. Riley reached the kitchen, expecting to be alone, but the second she entered the room, she stopped moving completely. Colton stood near the counter, pouring coffee, still dressed in black slacks from the night before. His sleeves rolled up, while exhaustion softened the sharpness in his face. He looked like he had not slept either. The moment his eyes lifted and landed on her, the entire room seemed to go still. His gaze slowly moved over her bare legs, before stopping at the shirt hanging loosely against her body. Riley suddenly realized it was one of his. Colton noticed her realization immediately. "You stole my shirt." His voice sounded lower than usual this morning. Riley folded her arms instinctively. It was comfortable. He walked toward her slowly, eyes never leaving her face. "Keep it." Riley swallowed hard as he stopped directly in front of her. The tension between them felt even heavier now than the night before, because nothing remained unspoken anymore. They both knew exactly what was happening between them. Colton's eyes moved slowly over her again, before he finally asked quietly, "Did you sleep at all?" Riley looked away briefly. "Not really." "Me neither." Something about hearing that affected her more than it should have. She glanced back up carefully. "Because of me?" Colton gave a faint smile without humor. "Riley." The way he said her name alone nearly unraveled her again. He reached past her for a coffee mug, his chest brushing lightly against her shoulder in the process. Riley's breathing immediately became uneven. Colton noticed. Of course he noticed. He paused beside her, close enough for her to feel his warmth. "You're nervous again." Riley laughed softly under her breath. "You make that sound surprising." His eyes lowered briefly toward her lips, before returning to her eyes again. "You kissed me first." Her stomach tightened instantly, hearing him say it out loud again. Colton stepped even closer now, one hand resting lightly against the counter beside her. "Do you regret it?" Riley opened her mouth to answer quickly, but no lie came out. The silence itself became enough of an answer. Something dangerous shifted behind Colton's eyes after that. Desire, relief, hunger he was trying very hard to control. "That's what I thought," he said quietly. Riley's pulse pounded harder as his hand slowly brushed against her waist again. This time, she did not move away. The tension between them stretched painfully, every second feeling heavier than the last. Colton's voice dropped lower. "You should tell me to stop before I forget how." Riley looked up at him slowly. "Do you want me to?" For the first time since meeting him, Colton actually looked close to losing control completely. His jaw tightened hard before he answered. "No." The honesty in that single word sent heat rushing through her entire body instantly. Riley could feel her heart pounding against her ribs as his hand slid slightly farther along her waist, pulling her gently against him. "Colton," she whispered softly. He closed his eyes briefly, hearing his name leave her lips like that. When he opened them again, the restraint in his expression looked dangerously thin now. "You have no idea how hard this has been for me," he admitted quietly. Riley's fingers slowly curled against the front of his shirt before she could stop herself. "What has?" Colton stared at her intensely. "Sleeping one hallway away from you every night, knowing all I want is to touch you." The confession made her breathing catch softly. Nobody had ever wanted her with this level of intensity before. Not just desire, need, obsession. Riley should have felt overwhelmed by it, but instead she felt something even more dangerous. Safe. Colton gently tilted her chin upward again, his thumb brushing along her skin while his voice softened. "Last night changed things." Riley nodded slowly. "I know." His eyes searched hers carefully. "Tell me to slow down, and I will." The fact that he meant it completely affected her more than she expected. Beneath all his control and possessiveness, Colton still treated her choices carefully. That realization made her chest ache unexpectedly. Riley shook her head slightly. "I don't want you to slow down." The second the words left her mouth, Colton kissed her again. Harder this time. Hungrier. Weeks of restraint finally cracked beneath the surface as his hands tightened against her waist, pulling her fully against him, while Riley melted instantly into the kiss. Her fingers tangled into his shirt as his mouth moved against hers, with desperate intensity that stole the air from her lungs completely. Colton kissed her like a man starving after years without anything real to hold on to. Riley felt herself losing track of every logical thought again, until suddenly he pulled away sharply, breathing heavily. She stared at him in confusion. "What happened?" Colton pressed his forehead briefly against hers, eyes closed tightly like he was fighting himself. "You." His voice sounded rough now. "You happened." Riley's chest rose unevenly as she watched him struggle for control right in front of her. Then slowly, carefully, Colton brushed his fingers through her hair before speaking again. "If I keep kissing you right now," he said quietly, "I'm not letting you walk away from me tonight." Riley's pulse jumped hard, hearing those words, because deep down she realized something terrifying. She wasn't sure she wanted to walk away anymore either. Riley stood completely still in Colton's arms, her heartbeat so loud she could barely hear anything else. The tension between them had finally become impossible to deny, impossible to hide behind arguments or excuses anymore. Every look, every touch, every dangerous moment between them had led here, and judging by the way Colton was staring at her now, he understood that just as clearly as she did. His hands remained firmly against her waist while he tried to steady his breathing again. But Riley could still feel the restraint trembling beneath his calm exterior. For the first time since meeting him, she realized something almost unbelievable. Colton Hayes, the man feared by half the city, was terrified of pushing her too far. That realization softened something inside her completely. Riley slowly lifted her hand against his face, brushing her fingers lightly along his jaw. The roughness of his stubble beneath her touch made her stomach tighten again. Colton closed his eyes briefly, leaning into her hand for the smallest moment before looking at her again. "You keep doing that," he said quietly. Riley frowned softly. "Doing what?" His gaze stayed locked onto hers. "Making me forget how dangerous I'm supposed to be." The honesty in his voice wrapped around her chest slowly. Riley smiled faintly, despite herself. "Maybe you're not as cold as everyone thinks." A quiet laugh escaped him under his breath, low and rough and rare enough to make her heart race all over again. "Don't say that too loudly," he murmured. "You'll ruin my reputation." Riley laughed softly, this time too. And the moment the sound left her mouth, Colton looked at her like she had just given him something priceless. She noticed it immediately. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Colton brushed his thumb gently along her cheek. "Because I've imagined this for weeks." Riley's pulse jumped again. "Imagined what?" His expression softened completely. "You smiling at me." The simplicity of the answer hit her harder than she expected. Riley looked down briefly, because suddenly emotions she did not know how to handle were building inside her chest too fast. Nobody had ever wanted the softer parts of her before. Most people only wanted what she could give them temporarily. But Colton wanted her moods, her laughs, her stories, her fears, every fragile piece she spent years hiding from the world. And somehow, the most dangerous man she had ever met was also becoming the safest place she had ever known. Colton gently tilted her chin upward again. "Talk to me." Riley hesitated before finally whispering, "I don't understand how this happened so fast." His eyes softened further, hearing the vulnerability in her voice. "Neither do I." Riley studied him carefully for a long moment. "Do you ever think about how insane this whole situation is?" Colton smiled slightly. "Every day." "And that doesn't bother you?" His hand slipped slowly into hers. "No." Riley stared down at their fingers intertwined together before asking the question that had quietly haunted her for days. "What if I never kissed you back?" Colton answered without hesitation. "I still would have taken care of you." Her chest tightened painfully, hearing that. "Even if I hated you forever?" He nodded once. "Yes." Riley looked at him in disbelief, because she realized he meant every word completely. That kind of devotion should have frightened her. Instead, it made her feel emotional in a way she could barely explain. Before she could respond, Colton's phone buzzed again across the kitchen counter. This time, he ignored it completely. The phone buzzed again. And again. Riley glanced toward it carefully. "Aren't you going to answer that?" Colton never looked away from her. "No." "What if it's important?" His gaze stayed steady. "You're more important." Riley shook her head softly, almost overwhelmed by him now. "You really mean that?" "I've never meant anything more." Silence settled between them again, but this time it felt different. Warmer, safer. The fear and tension that once filled every interaction between them had transformed into something dangerously intimate instead. Riley suddenly realized she could picture herself here beside him longer than she ever intended. Morning coffees, late-night conversations, his arms around her after difficult days. The thought should have scared her. Instead, it felt strangely right. Colton noticed the shift in her expression instantly. "What are you thinking about?" Riley hesitated before answering honestly. "You." His jaw tightened slightly, hearing that. "That's dangerous." "I know." He stepped closer again, until barely any space remained between them. "Say it again." Riley's heart raced faster. "What?" "Tell me you're thinking about me." Her cheeks warmed immediately, but she held his gaze anyway. "I'm thinking about you." The effect those words had on him was immediate. Colton's eyes darkened, while his fingers tightened carefully around hers. "Riley," he whispered, almost like hearing her admit that mattered more than anything else in the world. She could see it now so clearly. Beneath the power, the control, the dangerous reputation, Colton was simply a man completely undone by loving her, and somehow she was becoming undone by him too. He lowered his forehead gently against hers again, his voice quieter now. "You should know something." Riley swallowed softly. "What?" His eyes held hers completely when he answered. "I don't think I could let you go anymore, even if I tried." The words should have sounded possessive. Instead, they sounded painfully honest. Riley closed her eyes briefly, as emotion tightened inside her chest again. Then slowly, she wrapped her arms around his neck and held him close for the first time without hesitation. Colton went completely still against her, almost like even he had not expected her to choose him this openly yet. Riley felt his arms tighten around her carefully seconds later, holding her like she was something precious he never wanted to lose. And standing there together in the quiet kitchen, while morning sunlight poured through the windows around them, Riley realized something terrifyingly simple. Somewhere between the fear, the tension, the obsession, and the stolen kisses, she'd fallen for the man who kidnapped her. Completely, deeply, irreversibly. But the real question was this. If loving Colton Hayes already felt this intense now, what would happen when the 6 months finally came to an end? Would he truly let her walk away? Or had she already become the one thing the most dangerous man in the city could never survive losing?